This is Stone Cold Export, and in this video we will be taking a look at the Z490 Aorus Elite AC from Gigabyte. The reason I went for the AC version was simply that it was cheaper, which may not always be the case, but it is otherwise identical to the non-AC version. So in the box we obviously have the motherboard itself in the appropriate anti-static packaging. It's a very nice motherboard in my opinion anyway, and it's one of the cheaper Z490 motherboards. It's not cheap exactly, but yeah, it's about $200 I think, so it's not too bad. Of course you get the installation guide from Gigabyte, and you get the Aorus badge if you feel like plastering that onto your PC. You also get a manual that is surprisingly difficult to get out, so I gave up. And underneath here you get a Wi-Fi antenna, which is a nicer Wi-Fi antenna than what I'm used to getting. And you also get some black SATA cables, which is handy. And you get this connector to help you plug in your front panel connectors. So that's pretty much everything that's in the box. Now let's take a look at the motherboard itself, if we can get this packaging up. Let's just speed things up a bit. Here's the motherboard. It looks very good in my opinion anyway, and it definitely has a very good build quality, which of course you would expect given the price, but it's a very nice board. And it goes well with the Aorus GPU that I have, the 5700 XT. The board comes with a pre-installed I/O shield, which is a very nice touch. On the back there are a lot of USB Type A ports. You have 4 USB 2.0 ports. Then there are 6 USB 3.2 ports. The 2 red ones are the USB 3.2 Gen 2 10 gigabit ports, and the white and blue ones here are USB 3.2 Gen 1 5 gigabits per second ports. The white one is also used if you need to flash the BIOS without the CPU. In addition to the ports on the rear, we also have 2 USB 2.0 headers on the board, one USB 3.2 Gen 1 5 gigabit per second header, and we have a USB Type-C header. Although note that this USB Type-C header only supports USB 3.2 Gen 1, which is 5 gigabits per second and not the full 10. Back to the I/O panel, we also find a HDMI port. This only supports HDMI 1.4 and resolutions up to 4K at 30 frames per second. We also have the connection points for the Wi-Fi antenna. This board does not feature the new Wi-Fi 6 AX. It only supports Wi-Fi 5 AC, which is a bummer. You can swap in a Wi-Fi 6 card here if you wish, but it will probably be cheaper to just go for the Aorus Pro Wi-Fi or a similar priced model with Wi-Fi 6 support from MSI, for instance. We do get Bluetooth 5 though, which you can use to connect your Bluetooth headset or an Xbox One controller, for example. We also have a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port, and this is Realtek LAN, which is sort of looked down upon by a lot of people. I've had Intel LAN, Killer LAN, and cheap Realtek LAN, and personally I've never had an issue with any of them, but then again I'm not doing a lot of network heavy tasks, so might be something there. Moving on, the board has a Realtek ALC 1200 audio chip, which I was unable to find any specs on, but having used the board for a few days now, it's fine with your average headphones. As mentioned earlier, one of the USB ports on the back supports what Gigabytes call Q-Flash Plus, which lets you flash your BIOS without installing CPU or RAM. But the Q-Flash button is not on the back, it's mounted on the board itself. In my opinion, it's not really a big deal. It's a very nice feature to have, and not having the button on the back panel doesn't really bother me. Hopefully you won't have to use this feature a lot, and the 1 or 2 times you have to use it, it's not a big deal to just push the button on the board instead of the back panel, in my opinion. On the board we also have 4 LED headers. Along the bottom of the board we have 1 RGB LED header and 1 adjustable header. and the same thing along the top of the motherboard. These are controlled by Gigabyte's RGB software named RGB Fusion 2.0. I find it somewhat limited in what it can do, but you can have it running at the same time as Corsair iQ, which is more than I can say for ASRock's Polychrome software. This board also has some RGB lighting behind the VRM heatsink and down by the audio chip, but it's not very noticeable to be honest. Gigabyte also has an app that lets you control the lighting from your mobile device. It's supposed to work over your network, but I haven't tested it. There are 6 SATA ports on this motherboard, which should be enough for most people. We also find 3 M.2 ports on the board, but the top one is not currently in use. This one is probably for Intel's next gen CPUs and will hopefully support PCIe 4, but we will see when the time comes. The other 2 M.2 ports have very nice heatsinks, which are mounted by a screw and a sort of a nut. I'm not sure if they meant for the nut to unscrew with the screw that holds the heatsink. One of mine did, and the other didn't. Both of these ports support PCIe 3x4. If you are using an NVMe SSD in the bottom slot, all these SATA ports are available. If you install a SATA SSD in this part, one of your SATA connectors will be disabled. If you install either an NVMe SSD or a SATA SSD in the top slot, you will lose 2 SATA connectors. The board also has support for Intel Optane. The board does not feature Thunderbolt, but it has some internal connectors for a Gigabyte Thunderboard add-in card, but at that point you'll probably be better off buying a board with Thunderbolt included. Now, this next part makes me a bit sad, but we do not get a clear CMOS button, although we do get a jumper, and it's not as convenient as a button. Although hooking up a button to this jumper is a fairly trivial task. You can, for instance, use your reset button if you don't intend on using that for resetting your PC. We do not get support for SLI on this board. The top PCI Express slot gets 16 lanes, but the second full length slot is only 4 lanes, while the remaining 2 are a single lane. All of them are PCIe 3. The BIOS chip on this board is 256 megabits, which is 32 megabytes, but I would not expect more than 2 generations of support from Intel. The VRM is a 12 plus 1 phase with 50 amp power stages. The VRM cooling appears to be pretty good, with a heatsink with a fair amount of surface area. You do not get the direct fin array that the more expensive Pro model comes with, but this is still a very capable board. The overclocker High Cookie ran a 10900K at 5.4 GHz with this board, and it seemed to handle it without any issues. Memory support is also advertised as good, with support for up to 5000 MHz DDR4. I don't have memory that can reach those speeds, but I could run 4266 without any issues. Again, the overclocker High Cookie actually reached 6200 MHz on this board, and he also ran memtest overnight on 16 GB of 5000 MHz memory, and when you're above 1600% coverage in memtest with 0 errors, you're pretty much stable. Motherboards are getting better and better, and the build quality on this board feels a lot better than my X470 Taichi, even though the price was fairly similar. This one was a bit more expensive, but if you're looking for a good Z490 board for around $200, this one should be on your shortlist. It has a good power delivery and a good feature set along with a rather nice design, although that is highly subjective. That's pretty much it from me for now, so thank you so much for watching, and farewell.